Hello everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. You can feel it, right? Something has shifted. Not just in Washington, not just in policy circles, but in the way the United States sees the world, and more importantly, the way it sees itself. For decades, America told a very consistent story. Open markets, global leadership, alliances, free trade, international rules. This wasn't just policy, it was identity. The U.S. wasn't just another country playing the game, it was the system. And now, that system is being questioned from the inside. And if you want to understand what's really happening, why trade wars, tariffs, military pressure, and even tensions with allies seem to be happening all at once, you have to look past the headlines. Because what looks like chaos might actually be something else. But not in the way a lot of people are telling you. There's a growing argument out there that what we're seeing is all part of a single, coherent grand strategy that Donald Trump, whether you agree with him or not, is executing a calculated plan. And that plan has one central goal: contain China before it's too late. Now, that idea is compelling, it's clean, it makes the world easier to understand. But reality is messier than that. And if you oversimplify it, you miss what actually matters. So let's slow down and unpack what's really going on here. First, we need to start with something that's bigger than Trump. Because this shift didn't start with him, and it won't end with him either. What we're witnessing is the slow collapse of a model that defined the global economy for the last 40 years. Call it globalization, call it the liberal international order, call it whatever you want. At its core, it was based on one key assumption: that economic integration would make the world more stable. The idea was simple. Countries that trade together don't go to war. Supply chains create interdependence. Growth creates stability. And over time, even political systems might converge. For a while, it seemed like that was working. But then reality started to push back. Manufacturing left the United States at a scale nobody fully anticipated. Entire regions were hollowed out. Middle-class jobs disappeared. And the benefits of globalization, while real, were unevenly distributed. At the same time, countries like China didn't evolve the way many in the West expected. Instead of becoming more politically aligned with Western systems, China leveraged global integration to build something very different, a hybrid model that combined state control with market power and scaled it faster than anyone thought possible. So now, you have a situation where the very system the U.S. helped build is being used in ways that challenge its own position. That's the backdrop. That's the real starting point. And once you understand that, a lot of current policy starts to make more sense. Because what we're seeing now is not just a reaction to China, it's a reaction to the limits of globalization itself. And this is where Trump comes in. Trump didn't invent this shift. He didn't sit down one day and design a perfectly coherent long-term strategy to reshape the global order. What he did was something different. He accelerated a change that was already underway, and he did it in a way that was louder, sharper, and a lot more disruptive. Take tariffs, for example. On the surface, tariffs look like a straightforward economic tool. You tax imports, protect domestic industries, and try to rebalance trade. But in today's context, tariffs are doing something more. They're sending signals. They're telling companies, rethink your supply chains. They're telling allies, you can't stay neutral forever. And they're telling competitors, the old rules don't apply the way they used to. That's not just economics, that's strategy. But here's the important part: it's not a clean, top-down strategy. It's a mix of long-term thinking, short-term politics, and personal negotiation style all rolled into one. And if you ignore that complexity, you end up overestimating how controlled this process really is. Because not every move fits neatly into a master plan. Some decisions are clearly driven by domestic pressure, jobs, elections, public opinion. Some are reactive, and some are just instinct. That doesn't mean there's no strategy. It means the strategy isn't as unified as people like to think. Now let's talk about China, because this is where the conversation usually gets very black and white. Yes, China is the most significant long-term competitor the United States faces. That's not a fringe view. That's a widely shared assessment across both parties, across different administrations, across most serious policy circles. But here's where things get tricky. Recognizing China as a central challenge is not the same as saying every single U.S. action is part of a coordinated effort to counter it. Reality is more layered. The U.S. is dealing with multiple pressures at once: Russia, regional conflicts, economic uncertainty, internal political division. China is the biggest piece of the puzzle, but it's not the only piece. And sometimes, policies that are framed as about China are just as much about something else. Domestic manufacturing, political messaging, alliance dynamics. If you reduce everything to one single cause, you lose that nuance. And that nuance matters, especially when we start talking about risk. Because this is where the stakes get very real. There's a popular narrative that what looks like disorder is actually a form of strategic brilliance, that unpredictability itself is a tool, that pressure creates leverage, and that forcing change quickly is better than waiting. And there's some truth to that. In negotiations, unpredictability can work. In geopolitics, pressure can force alignment. But here's the problem. The more aggressive the strategy, the higher the risk of unintended consequences. If you push allies too hard, they don't always fall in line, they sometimes pull away. If you escalate economic pressure, you don't just weaken your competitor, you also create blowback in your own system. If you operate on multiple fronts at once, you increase the chances of miscalculation. And that's the part that often gets underestimated. Because it's one thing to initiate a strategic shift. It's another thing entirely to control where it leads. Right now, the United States is trying to do something extremely difficult. It's trying to rebalance its economy, reassert its industrial base, maintain global influence, manage alliances, and compete with a rising power all at the same time. Historically, transitions like this are messy. They're not linear, they're not perfectly planned, and they rarely go exactly as intended. So, when you hear people describe what's happening as a perfectly executed grand strategy, you should be skeptical. Not because there's no direction, but because the direction is being shaped in real time by events, by pressure, by politics, and by people. A more accurate way to think about it is this. The United States is undergoing a structural shift from a system built on global efficiency to one built on national resilience. Trump didn't create that shift. He made it impossible to ignore. He pushed it forward faster than anyone expected. And he did it in a way that raised both the potential rewards and the potential risks. So the real question isn't whether there is a strategy. There is. The real question is whether the system politically, economically, and institutionally can sustain it. Can the U.S. rebuild industrial capacity without triggering inflation or financial instability? Can it compete with China without sliding into open conflict? Can it pressure allies without breaking the alliances that have defined its global position for decades? And maybe most importantly, can it stay consistent long enough to see the strategy through? Because strategy only works if it lasts. And in a deeply divided political environment, that's far from guaranteed. So, when you look at what's happening today, don't just ask, is this planned? Ask something more important. Is this sustainable? Because in the end, that's what will determine whether this moment becomes a turning point or just another phase of instability. And right now, that answer is still very much up in the air. Thanks for watching.